Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Institute for Advanced Legal Studies, and thanks very much for joining us on what hasn't been a terribly good day for weather outside. So thank you for braving the elements and joining us here this evening. My name is Nora, and I'm Director of the Information Law and Policy Centre here at the Institute. I expect that I see a few familiar faces here, so I expect you're already on our mailing list, but if not, please do sign up to hear more about our events and what we're working on here, or Twitter as well. Before we begin, and as I have your attention, just want to let you know about a similar event that we're hosting here this week at the Institute on Thursday at 12:30, where one of our visiting fellows at the Institute from Istanbul, Dr. Gur, will be speaking on the legal limits of state autonomy in regulating transborder flows of personal data, a case study of Turkey. So if you're available at lunchtime, that will be taking place. And now for this evening, it's my very great pleasure to introduce our panel. Our lead speaker, Professor Irene Ng, is Director of the International Institute for Product and Service Innovation and Professor of Marketing and Service Systems at the University of Warwick. She's also the chairman of the hub of all things, the HAT Foundation Group, which I'm sure we're going to hear a lot more of later this evening. And there are a few newspapers circulating at the moment if you want to read a bit more about HAT and its objectives. A market design economist, Professor Ng is an advisor to large organizations, startups and governments on the design of markets and economic and business models in the digital economy. And joining us as discussants this evening are John Sheridan and Perry Keller. John Sheridan, whose academic background, over here on your far right, is a mathematics and computer scientist. His current hat is his digital hat, using hat a lot this evening, that's going to come up a lot, is digital director of the National Archives, and he has overall responsibility for the organization's digital services and digital archiving capability. Prior to this role, John was the head of the legislation services at the National Archives, where he led the team responsible for creating and, I think it's fair to say, revamping and updating legislation.gov.uk, which I'm sure I speak on behalf of all lawyers here, we're all very grateful for. John, librarians. And librarians, law librarians, all lawyers, academic, practical, policy-oriented, all very, very grateful. John recently led as principal investigator an Arts and Humanities Research Council-funded project, Big Data for Law, which explored the application of data analytics to the online statute book, winning the Halsbury Legal Award for Innovation. He serves on the UK Government's Data Leaders Group, and Open Standards Boards, which set standards for use of data across government. Our second discussant joining us this evening is Perry Keller, a reader in Media and Information Law at the Dixon Coombe School of Law at King's College London, where he teaches and researches issues relating to freedom of expression, privacy and data protection. He is author of European and International Media Law, published by Oxford University Press, and his current research concerns data privacy and security, and the transparency of urban life as a consequence of governmental and commercial surveillance, and the particular challenges that brings for liberal democracies, particularly in the governance, law and regulation within China. So in terms of our format for this evening, Irene Ng, our lead speaker, will speak for approximately 30 minutes, Irene. And then after that, each of our discussants will comment and give feedback on Irene's presentation for approximately 10 minutes each. Covering myself there with the caveats right at the end. We'll then open the discussion to the floor, which we will then not be recording. So for this evening, the recording is just of the panel and for the feedback. So we would just ask that you save your questions, if that's okay, for the part when we won't be recording. The first part will be made available on the Institute's and Centre's website. So without further ado, I would like to thank you all very much for being here and to thank our panel and to invite Irene to speak on this evening's seminar topic, Personal Data as an Asset, Design and Incentive Alignments in a Personal Data Economy.
Right, thank you, Nora, for inviting me. I'm going to quickly walk you through some of my thoughts. I have to thank Nora for making me work all weekend, because it's been a while since I've done an academic seminar, oddly enough. I tend to do it in summer because I meet my academic colleagues in summer, but departmental seminars tend to be less. But let me talk you through a little bit. I think some of you may know these figures. I don't know where they get it from. 272 billion in the EU. That's how big the data market is, and personal data, of course, being the fastest growing. This is from The Economist. And The Economist says it's valuable. The Royal Society says it's important. And the World Economic Forum says it's been productized. There. So clearly we're talking about something reasonably important. This is a very nice chart that I tend to flesh out very quickly at the beginning. It's basically to show you the current web of data creation to consumption, the economic value chain of personal data. There are thousands in this space. From the creation, in terms of the devices that create it, to the software that created it, to the storage, to the aggregation, to the analysis, the productization, to its consumption. There's a whole economy there. That sustains a heck of a lot of jobs. And it's all about brokering and manipulating and processing personal data. The market is not going away. I was in a very nice dinner in Cleveland, Ohio, in the US. And the man opposite me for dinner said to me, when I said, what is it that you do? He said, everything that's illegal in Europe. And I said, oh, so what is it that you really do? I said, well, I managed to drive up the number of, the percentage of people responding to catalogs going through your front door. It used to be at 0.000 crazy 1%, because nobody looks at that junk mail. But because I've managed to buy data across every sector in the market, I know absolutely that the person living in that house has just bought a house, some furniture, and is looking to moving, and therefore I dropped the right kind of pamphlets and catalogs through his door. It's reached 16% in terms of success rate for junk mail catalog. And I said, well, how do you do that? He was like, everything that you can't do in Europe. We acquire all the data. And so the reason I put this up is because I'm trying to explain to you the global picture of what's happening in personal data, not just Europe. Because it's kind of important because unlike Americans who think that baseball World Series is the World Series, we're kind of not the world. You know, we're just part of that world. So I'll give you a little bit of a landscape of what's going on in that world. I'm a market design economist. So what I was telling the gentleman, there's a third of me that's an engineer, there's a third of me that's an entrepreneur, and there's a third of me that's an economist. So today, I'm talking to you as the kind of economist, academic, and about the design challenges when we took on this project something like 5 years ago. I'll explain a little bit what it is. We're trying to look at personal data market redesign to align certain incentives so that it could have a better aggregated societal outcome that's more optimal, that's better for the economists. We'll just say more efficient outcomes, right? Than what it is currently. And what it is currently is you've got quite a number of externalities, which is privacy concerns, societal disapproval. There's all sorts of reasons, aspects of the personal data market that 7 professors sometime about 40 years ago felt that they didn't like, particularly when the future of the internet is about to explode a whole set of personal data into the market even more than it is currently. So your hairdryer gets connected, your TV gets connected, there's even more going out there. And so we're really interested in the future internet, not in the current internet. So I'll make that very clear. All right? The current internet is big, of course it is. It will get a whole lot bigger because it's about to jump out of the box with a lot of connected things. And 7 professors about 4 years ago won a £1.2 million EPSRC grant to say we were going to try to redesign that market. But let me just take you back to a very fundamental understanding of why personal data is the most valuable asset in a digital economy. This is Google. You all know this, right? This is the nice little Google. Engagement and influence is the key criteria on the internet.
You search, they infer about your persona, your interests, your priorities, your context, and your intentions. They recommend ads, and you click. You search, infer, recommend, click. Search, infer, recommend, click. That basically is how a platform gets you engaged and influences your choice. Facebook, identical. You post, they infer, they recommend ads, you click. Post, infer, recommend, click. Same cycle of engagement and influence. Amazon, now you buy online. They infer, they recommend products, you click. This cycle is repeated, and one of the reasons why it is repeated is because it works. It reinforces itself because you get more engaged, because they are very good at inferring. You know, I bought tons of stuff, you know. People always used to say, Irene, you're all into this thing, and why are you so much into Facebook and Amazon and everything? I said, of course, you've got to hug your enemies, right? So if it's just a few types of personal data, search, maps, social media, posting, buying online, they have 3 organizations with a market capitalization of $600 billion. It works. It really does. And they didn't intend to be such a big monolithic company. I mean, seriously, you know. They just wanted to give you a good service. That's all they do. But what happens is, one of the biggest market design challenge we have is that personal data, therefore, is scarce. They have it, nobody else does. That's why all the ads are flocking into Facebook and Google. And that's why a lot of ads are going into these platforms. It is a scarce commodity. Engagement influence that is reinforcing means more data, more insights, and more engagement. Personal data with that few bits is creating these 3 huge companies. And it's a lot, and if you then let it go out even more, which we will, we've already started with banks and may even more with GDPR, we're going to flood the market. This is not really a bad thing, I have to say, all right? I'll explain. So we'll get more engagement and influence that is reinforcing, and all companies are going this way. Herbert Simon, if you bother to read The Science of the Artificial, said that if there is a wealth of information, everybody will be competing for your attention. And you see that already. As more and more information comes into the internet, all they want is your attention. So Google, Facebook, and the tech giants do not just have your data. Please don't think that they win because of data. No, they don't. They win because of attention. So getting data is just only part of the problem. Getting attention is a lot harder, right? So it's not data that is really the competitive advantage here alone. It's data and attention. Now, the pattern is clear. If you want to innovate, you want to compete, you all already see that more personal data is needed. More will be generated, more will be acquired. Unless we start to look at how we align incentives, the market will continue pretty much in the same direction. So we have a design challenge too. Companies genuinely want more data. I was with TripAdvisor in Boston, and you are with different companies. Every app out there is struggling because the tech giants have taken so much attention away that they have problems with customer engagement. So you have allies here. You know, you have companies that genuinely have difficulty trying to get more attention, even though they are huge companies. It is also well known that the payoff of personal data comes from combinations. So this is a nice little illustrated chart that I kind of drew out with 3 data sets, F, G, and H, and to tell you that as they overlap, the biggest value for people, society, and organizations tend to sit in this space called big data. So everybody came into this and said they were going to hear big data talk. So I thought I had to put the word big data somewhere. It's the only time you will see it, unfortunately. Right? So you get big data in there. Of course, with sharing, you have externalities, and that is privacy loss. In fact, the highest likelihood of privacy loss and potential market failure is in that space of which you share all the data, because it's so easy to infer who you are, where you are, and what you're doing from sharing data. If you stood still and there was, in the location data, a little spot between 11 o'clock and 6 o'clock, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that that's your house, even if it doesn't have your identity, right? And then it doesn't take much to know exactly who you are, right? So in that little pink space is the fact that I absolutely know who, what, and everything else that you are. So there is no such thing as saying, I can strip my identity away. Once you combine, it becomes dead easy. All right. Okay, where was I? However, I'm an economist, after all. So the highest amount of rent you get, which is how much profit you get, will be from that space too. And this is why everybody then flocks into this. If we're going to do more about big data, we have to. And then if you think about highly likelihood of privacy loss, you go like, we'll use AI to solve that. Yes, of course, we will. And so we had, very quickly, design challenge 1, personal data is scarce. Design challenge 2, companies want a lot more personal data. Design challenge 3, the payoff on personal data comes from combination. And then we say, well, we'll have regulation to do this. You know, we'll have regulation. Of course, the government is going to jump in. So here's a little hypothesis. It's not empirically proven in any way. Any attempt of territorial governments to enforce privacy regulation will increase the likelihood of data-driven companies to exit. It's quite easy. If you have a little app, it sits on your phone. It doesn't matter whether I am a company in the BVI, Japan, or just down the road in Rutland. Do you actually know where your apps come from? You don't, do you? Right? So this is an interesting thing. If you track Amazon, this is a little snippet that you might run to. If you buy something on Amazon, try to buy a book, for example. If you are with one of those banks, I don't know whether you've noticed this, one day I might do a class action suit on this, but you will find that if your bank is particularly sensitive to European transactions, there's a 5p charge, even though you swore you never bought a damn thing from Europe. But actually it was Amazon Luxembourg. And that is why if it's a digital purchase, it would be routed that way. If you actually bought a good that was actually based in the United Kingdom and it actually was shipped from you from the United Kingdom, they will pay tax on it. So, but if you bought a digital good, you don't have to, right? Because it could come from anywhere. It could come from Brunei. That's the real digital economy, right? That is the real thing that's on your phone right now. This thing on your phone isn't territorial at all. It is entirely global. There was a company that was, before iPhone had their little flashlight, was actually putting up a flashlight here, and in return for a flashlight, they were hoovering up all the data. I think it was going to, I don't know where it was. It was going to somewhere. No, Macedonians did the fake news. I have to remember which country. I mean, there are so many business models to hoover it out into a different place. Can't touch them, right? And so if you start thinking compliance becoming, oh dear, I'm terrible at this. Compliance become more expensive and for startups at the beginning, so they exit. And in stage 2, when more data is available and a greater value gained from it, if you're gaining more competitive advantage, you would also exit. So what we tend to have is you have potential adverse selection where those who stay are the big near monopolies who can actually engage with regulation, companies not driven by data, local entrenched organization, or the lower layers of the data economic chain. It's potential, okay? The likely compromise that is a combination of the two. These are just polarizing. But what I'm explaining to you, the few things is how little power governments have on the internet, and how mobile and how great these companies are in running and in regulatory arbitraging. I happen to know this because I advise quite a number of startups, and the first thing I say to them is, what are you doing? And if they are a data-driven company, I'll ask them where their moral compass is, whether it matters to be in the United Kingdom or not. You want to make it, you have to understand this is a country of huge compliance costs. But then I also have companies whom I advise to say there's a lot of credibility and rules and institutions within the UK that you will benefit from too. You have to weigh it up. Which one works for you? But design challenge 4, governments have limited power on the internet. Assets. You know, I've always asked this question. Had a very nice dinner once with a nice gentleman from GCHQ. I ask this question every time I meet someone from the GCHQ. Why don't you guys have a browser? I would gladly trade my Safari, Chrome, or whatever, who are the gateways to the internet, to a British browser that perhaps might be slightly more aligned to what I believe in terms of data and the way it leaks to the internet. Because truly, the internet is not private. Let's just not pretend that it is. It's like walking out your door and you have to pay toll every single step of the way. Whether you pay it through money or pay it through data, you pay. This is the internet. Now, some of us who believe that the internet should be more like civil society, maybe you should have private spaces, community spaces, but isn't that yet? Currently, it's all commercial. So that design challenge 6 is, wait, all these companies that hold personal data, we call them organization personal data. All personal data is currently OPD, is given away by individuals, right? And is trapped inside. So we have a fundamental structural issue, which is they are actually trapped. Now, unless you're a data broker, manage to get it out of them, and some of them do, it's quite high in terms of transaction costs trying to get data out. Design 7 and 8, therefore, for organizations, personal data is economically risky, is costly, is intrusive, and it doesn't provide insights. For people, there's an $18 billion industry of tracking. Things like that. They want to reuse, combine, and share and control sharing. They want to be able to manipulate and share and use their own data. They can't do that either because it's trapped within apps. So part of my job 4 years ago was to literally bring them together and think about how the market could be redesigned given the 8 design challenges we had. Especially around what personal data is. And the first thing we started was the nature of the asset drives the nature of transactions. As an economist who design markets and we design transactions, you have to think to design these transactions, you've got to fundamentally design the asset. So let's look at asset design. This is probably very familiar territory with the lawyers now, propertization. And that's the idea of assigning property rights, whether it's intellectual property rights or some other property rights, to personal data. So let me explain a little bit about the economist's view of what a digital good is. It might be kind of alien, this bit, so let me explain to you what it is. Personal data could be akin to digital goods. Digital goods traditionally are music, software. They are non-rival, how do you pronounce this? Rivalrous, right? It means, this is a sort of a quote from, is it Franklin or Jefferson, who says that my candle, when I light, will not diminish your candle. Meaning if I use something, I will not diminish your use of it. And that's what digital goods tend to do. If you listen to a song, I listen to the song, we're not going to diminish, just because I listen to it, I'm not going to deny you of listening to it. Unlike if I have a physical book, if you took it from me and you read it, I can't read it, right? So it's one of the properties. It is, of course, with digital goods, infinitely expansionable, which means you can copy infinite times. Forget the excludability first, just the fact that by its nature, marginal cost of copying is 0. You can copy it million times. I'm sure your cluttered desktop and your Dropbox has tons of those, especially travel itineraries. There is excludability legally and technically, so you can exclude through intellectual property rights, you can exclude technically by denying access. These are the 3 main properties common to other digital goods for personal data. But where the economists talk about digital good, they differ from personal data is when we talk about indivisibility and discreteness. They talk about, say, a piece of music, it's not going to be the same piece of music if you didn't have the last 30 seconds of it, right? And that's the nature of its discreteness. It's kind of whole that way. Not so with personal data. In fact, personal data is hugely divisible and it's not usually discrete. And they talk about digital goods, the economists talk about it in terms of being expensive to produce and cheap to reproduce. Well, the personal data, because all costs are sunk on the internet, is actually cheap to produce and cheap to reproduce. And so that's the propertization. The challenge, of course, in the old propertization of personal data, when people like Halvarian and a few other economists came together and really started in the early 2000s talk about property rights of personal data, started to look at two kinds of frameworks. It was very polarizing. The Americans, of course, went for the self-regulatory framework to say, no need for intervention. Market correction will exist. There's no problem. There's no need for inalienability. Trade-off will exist. There will be sharing and protection. The market will solve itself. It's pretty much the same argument as net neutrality, same argument as guns, all of that, right? What the problem is, even the economists will admit that the contracts are incomplete, they are very difficult to enforce, there's a lot of ambiguity, huge transaction costs because the boundaries are not exactly clear. So therefore the Europeans came in and said, no. We go for the regulatory framework, which is it's a human right to personal data protection at all costs. There are privacy issues with free alienability, and this is where the state becomes a little bit stronger in terms of protecting the rights of citizens, and the propertization may lead to market failure because privacy preferences are not valued because I know all about you because personal data has become propertized and I can buy it, right? So these are some of the issues and the challenges when they try to do with organization of personal data. We kind of then decided to take a different approach. We decided that, you know what? If you have non-rivalry, expansionability, divisibility, and excludability, well, let's just propertize it around a completely different personal data market. Let's just create a parallel one. Let's just not bother with the things that you are holding and start completely afresh with a new set of data, with a new asset. And this is what the hat is all about. It's an EPSLC project of 1.2 million, but subsequently quite a few projects that built on it. The hat believes in something quite fundamental, which is we give away because our technologies, personal computer to personal smartphone, has a browser operating system, and all we do with a few clicks and a few taps and a few mouse clicks, just give it all away. And all these people with wonderful cloud servers and AI and bots and software have a lot of processing power. Or what if we just kind of turn it around and say, what if I gave you a cloud server? What if I gave you the same abilities they have? So, the propertization with the hat microserver is quite simple. It's giving the person a hat. And the hat is a microserver. It's a Docker engine containerized microservice, one database per person. Sitting in the cloud currently, but you could always take it off and put it in a Raspberry Pi if you want. And because they are wrapped around with a lot of microservices and middleware services, it's a legal artifact. The data controller and processor is the data subject himself. Unfortunately, the law has a problem with this. Discussions with ICO suggest that no, data controllers are only organizations. So they have just exempted a few thousand hats because the individual as a data controller is exempt. Yay, yippee! Really? So the individual is the data controller and the same subject. It's a technological artifact in the sense that because it's like your PC in the sky, you can embed a lot of private AI, private algorithms, and it's an economic artifact. So if you put any data in, you can exchange data out in combinations. So you can act as a private data account or a premium user account. Now bear in mind, we do not deny other companies of having the same data. So you're making a copy. Very clear. However, it is more than just a data store because it has a smart hat engine. Is able of with a few clicks, you can choose to install or subscribe to AI. You can have insights that can be shared real time on demand. You can also create your own or acquire your own expertise in terms of applications. Now, it's pretty much treated like a PC, but it's in the cloud. So now you've got your own cloud server. Wrapped around it are all the rights that you're entitled to, all the data within it. The market design, of course, is the idea of matching for a person. If you give a person a hat, what do they do with it? So before I go there, let me just tell you a little bit about, is the idea that if I give, why would organizations give their customers a hat? Remember the design challenge of they want more data? Come ask me for it. So if I get all my data back, I'm in the same market as Facebook and Google. I create a parallel market. We're competing. It's the same data. We're just competing, right? So you're using a market in a way to say you can get it direct from your own customer, fully scalable, one set of APIs. You don't need to code. In fact, I cannot just give you insight. If I subscribe to enough AI, I can give you data and I can give you insights. It's a little bit like someone was explaining to me that I was hired to do a job in a factory to separate nuts and seeds. And one day I appeared with an incredible way of, and I'm paid by number of nuts and seeds I separate. One day I appeared at the factory with a new robotic exoskeleton that can separate nuts and seeds at a million per second. And now I get paid a hell of a lot more. So it's a bit like that, right? So it is the augmented capability of the human person from a data point of view. Not an exoskeleton, but a data point of view. And the idea that individuals then can get their own data and share it and get insights. So the idea of designing a market is the design for thickness, where every single company that wants to share with another company your data, you give consent and consent and consent and consent. You, through subject access or otherwise, bring it back into your micro server and then decide that through one set of APIs, share it whenever you want. You want my 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock location? I'm happy to give it to you. Why don't you ping me a voucher where the best coffee is? You want my tweets in Boston? You want what I'm wearing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? The hat is able to slice and dice to be able to give different types of data. And so it becomes the epitome to the logical extreme of what in economics we call divisibility. You can infinitely divide down to the smallest data point. Now, what would the market buy, right? Creating thickness is therefore also talking to government companies like GovMetric and Bolt. The hat has got quite a number of partners in this space, which is you have your own space for your own data. So it's treated like a data account. It's treated like a user account. Would you like a private data account to hold the data we have on you? Very nicely, ask. And you might just get it one day if you go to the council and somebody said, would you like a private data account for the feedback you've just given? And you might just take it, and it sits in there. However, for the rest of the people who want data from you to give recommendations, personalized ads, verified actions, or research, you can give it to them just like that. And so the idea that the scaffold into the current world is, well, let's just make user accounts that sit on apps obsolete, shall we? If you then think about a future of Internet of Things and the future of every app that's coming up that needs a user account, please stop thinking about a user account. It's expensive to build. You've got to think of containment. You've got to think about economics and risk. Why don't you just sit on the private data account? I've got one. And just give users private data accounts. So this is the concept of thickness for economics. How it works is that data come in. There's a data plug provider. So you can create all kinds of data plugs on the hat. Currently, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we've got Google. Coming up in a few weeks, supposed to be Spotify, but we're doing something different with that now. Coming out will be data debit. So it behaves like a current account, savings account, data account. pretty much it, right? You made it easy. So the idea that you have to reduce congestion in economics in terms of market design is to have very clear boundaries, very fast transactions, a few taps, create a data debit, few taps, you can cancel a data debit. Try not to cancel it if you've already agreed to give your data to insurance and they give you a whopping discount. Establishing safety, the technology stack that built the hat is a service provider, and every single role on the platform is governed by the Hat Community Foundation, which has a very strong governance rule in terms of the T's and C's and moving the T's and C's up to the platform council, of which they can be approved. So how much time do I have left? 5 minutes? Okay. So I'm quickly going through here. In terms of how we align the incentive. We create a model of data relationship with private data accounts that will subsume the old user account system, basically making the old account obsolete. Yes, you can still have user account, but it's more expensive. You're going to be alone. At some point, hopefully, we will subsume the old. The open source hats becoming a public good on the internet, even while for-profit middleware services can be used to house it in the box, house it in the cloud. And so the open source hat and its schema, its architecture, currently being discussed in some of the computer science and talking to IETF about making it a standard. Might be, might not be. Build the technology on the internet. Stop the subnet encryptions that we see. Every hat microserver calls on simple JSON identity tokens if you're from computer science. By HTTP call, a protocol, sending a data point is exactly the same as sending an email. It's secure socket layer, it's SSL. Really, it is very simple. Just build it on the internet. The reason is we want to expand the capability of the internet to subsume what private data accounts could be in the future. Reduce the scarcity of personal data by competing with more personal data. Yeah, that's it. Paradoxically, flood the market. Available directly from us. One of the paradoxes that we have is that the more we fight for privacy, the more scarce personal data becomes, the bigger tech giants become. So we created our own giants, basically. The economic argument has been pretty much like that for a while now. The hat owner's own action in control and processing. So when I will show you how I control my hat, and the idea that when I toggle or when I press a keystroke to bring data in and out, it is actually a code, a higher level of code, if you wish. And so that I am in control of all the things that I do on the hat, and therefore no one makes some of the important decisions for me. Hat data unencumbered and constrained by the source. This is a very important part, and that's the reason why we ask hats to bring in data through subject access rather than through API third-party access. Increasing the coordination use with on-demand. So the idea that to create hyper-connectivity and hyper-coordination, the hat must be everywhere. So if you wanted to fill in the form in a hotel, you could just ping your data. And most importantly, to create incentives for data to move. The last thing we want is to lock up the data. The more we want is valuable data, and only the bits of data you want to share. Current data sharing is very lumpy because it creates all kinds of leakage. If you could divide it into much smaller pieces, you could have a better control over how privacy is being leaked out. And of course, disincentivize hacking through a decentralized system. There's as much interest to hack your hat as there is to hack your router in your house. Because you just get one database, right? So try not to be important. Of course, 2018 is GDPR, so give up the biggest mining rights of personal data for digital innovation. So hey, we're mining. So open source community of researchers, companies, stakeholders, all working together through API access to mine as much. And friends of mine says, so I get my data into my hat, then so what? I said, when you first got your money into your piggy bank, you ain't gonna spend it anytime soon, right? Just get it in and sort of accumulate. You'll get there somehow, The hat community is building. We tend to think of the microserver as very new, as remember the PC. When they first got it, what's your first software? Lotus 123, was it? What am I going to do with this box? In 1986, when I was trying to persuade everybody to get a PC, everyone slammed the door at my face and said, I don't need a PC. I've got the best typewriter. It could backspace an entire sentence. How about that? That was 1986. And today, and I tell people, get a hat. I don't need a hat. I got a smartphone. That's how I think about it. All right. Of course, we invite partners to innovate, and startups are welcome. This is the current ecosystem. There's quite a number of universities in here and companies that are doing all kinds of things to it. Metaphors, right? In design market, we talk about metaphors. So we talk personal computer, personal smartphone, personal microphone. Wrote an article on Wired. You can most welcome to go on Google and find it on the net. But I think I did it in 30 minutes. Thank you. Next year I was going to show you my hat. That's right. I'm going to show you my hat. This is my hat. So this is, oh for goodness sake. So this is, let me just log out. Let me log out. Okay, this is my hat. Let me log in. My hat address is irene.hubbard.net. You can actually go to that, and that's my public profile. It's my password. Someone please build a password manager on the hat. It goes in. And I know I've got all kinds of Google Calendars things because I'm beta testing a lot of things, but I shared this, I tweeted, I shared a story. I woke up, I slept 5 hours, 48 minutes, it's your fault. I have an event, I walked 2,370 steps, also your fault because I was stuck on my computer all day. I tweeted, I posted a photo, I had a Chinese New Year lunch event. Look, this is a bit of my data. You can go to data plugs, and there are quite a number of data plugs that you can pull in your own data for. This is available on App Store in iOS, by the way, if you want to get some. And you can explore. There are different apps built on the hat. There's one called Notables. This is the Notables app. The Notable app is also built on the hat. You can just kind of log in. Oh no, I have a Notables app, do I? I'll show you. So this is one of the apps that run on the hat. I can write notes. I can say, I am talking at IALS. And then I can do, I can take a photo. Okay, I'll take a photo. Yeah. Isn't this surreal? I'm going to use the photo, okay. Instead of making it private, I'm going to share it. Instead of sharing forever, I can share it for 1 day. No, maybe what? Forget it. Share it forever. Share it on Facebook. Let's do that. Let's be ironic and say
Everyone's consent afterwards.
Yeah. Take a photo. I share now. And it's saved on my hat, and that's the picture. If I went to Facebook, where are you? Let's see. What have I done? There. I'm talking. So this is real. I just posted from my hat. If I wanted to, I could of course take it off. I could just go, here's my thing, and I say I don't want it shared. This will remove your post. Warning, comments at the destination will also be deleted. Proceed, delete. I save, it's gone. It should be gone from Facebook, and whether it's truly gone, all the lawyers will tell you, is it really truly gone? I can, oh no, it's not gone. It takes my tech people tells me it takes 2 minutes. So after 2 minutes, you can check back. So at least protect all your privacy. Okay. But this is sort of kind of a little bit of understanding what the hat is. But yeah, thank you.
Well, Irene, thank you so much for what was a really fascinating presentation and what is effectively a live case study right now, which was very interesting to literally us all be a part of just now. So if you're ready, John, it'd be great to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
So I'm going to have a crack at very quickly responding. And this is coming from a contrasting perspective. So, and it's offered in the spirit of a contrast rather than a rebuttal. And this is from an institutional perspective, an institution that's looking after 1,000 years of our nation's records and history. But if you want to get a sense for what we're in the business of doing, we're the archive of government, so in a sense, insofar as government is looking at us and collecting data about us, we provide two opportunities. One is that you get to look at government through the records that we preserve and make available for people to inspect, and you get to see what government saw albeit after 20 or 30 years, when records are available, if you like, you get to look through government's eyes. And personal data vaults and this whole question about how we work with and use personal data looms large for us as an institution. Now there's lots of things happening, lots of people thinking about how we manage personal data, an EU-funded project. I've 7 thoughts or observations from our perspective as an archive which we offer to this conversation. The first is around consent, and in the words of the Information Commissioner, Elizabeth Denham, an archivist, consent is not a silver bullet. There are lots of issues around consent, no doubt, that we will talk a little bit about in the Q&A. It's not for an archive the only basis that we have in law for processing personal data. So in the General Data Protection Regulations, we have processing for archiving purposes in the public interest as a legal basis that we can use for processing personal data. So the law is accounting for not just consent-based mechanisms for data processing. The second, if consent's not a silver bullet, speaks to a point that I think is underneath the huge drive for this stuff. We encode more than we think. That's why, whenever you have some personal data, people are desperate to get their hands on it, to release the additional information about your propensity to provide a particular product, to release the additional information that's contained therein. Now, for us, that means that we have information that doesn't look like personal data, that might become personal data through novel kinds of computation, novel kinds of analysis. So, for example, we have the video of the Supreme Court that we preserve, but what if I have a machine learning algorithm that can say something about the state of the speaker's health? We encode more than we think. And as we develop new methodologies, we will be able to release new facts from existing encodings. Third, which is a point that Ted Nelson, the writer of this book, Computer Lib, way back in 1974, makes powerfully, everything is intertwingled. Now, by this, he meant this desire we have to make things hierarchical, but it's true for data. We don't live in a world that neatly divides into personal data and non-personal data, or sensitive personal data and non-personal data. Even my DNA as data contains quite a lot of information about my brother. We are connected, and the data about us is connected. It's not all just about us. Everything is deeply intertwingled, and our personal data is too. The next point, which is, as we move into this arena of possibility, and this is a shout out for the professional. Now, the archive profession dates back to this guy, Theodore van Riemsdyk. We have over 100 years of developing our practice through great giants like this is Hilary Jenkinson, one of our predecessors at the National Archives, who wrote a manual of archives administration. This is T.R. Schellenberg, another legend in archiving. The point is that as a profession, we have values and codes. So here's the Code of Ethics, produced by the International Council on Archives, and it provides some bounds within which we operate. And I think we would argue that having professional values around what we do and don't do with data is important. So a duty of the archivist to maintain the integrity of the record, but take care of privacy. and take care of the special trust that we have that goes with the particular privileges that we have for processing data in the public interest. The next point is to trust, and that you need to work hard to gain trust and to retain trust. Now, for us, trust is hugely important. With our processing of personal data in the archive, our risk appetite for compliance is the most averse on our risk matrix. So we as an institution take a stance that for processing personal data, we will avoid anything which could be challenged. Even unsuccessfully, we set out explicitly to play it safe. And that's because it's important for our institution to be trusted if we're going to get to do some of the extraordinary things we need to do to make available the record for the future. And of course, we're interested in all sorts of new types of technology we might use for underscoring trust. Blockchain's a good example. The sixth point, the postmodernists had a point. The postmodernists had a really good go at archives in the 1970s, and they observed this question of who decides what evidence the future gets to have now. And the same question arises for personal data vaults. There is decision-making in what information we store and what we choose to model and what we choose not to model, what we care about and what we don't care about. And that's the exercise of power. How is that held to some degree of account? And finally, in a matrix-like way, we need to allow the future the opportunity to perhaps reach a different view. So, lessons from the archive in relation to personal data vaults. Consent's not a silver bullet. We always encode more than we think. Everything is intertwinkled, and that's true of data, and in particular personal data. Perhaps not such a simple world as we might hope for. Professional ethics matter. You need to work to retain trust. The postmodernists had a point, and we maybe need to allow the future the opportunity to attain a different view. That's me done.
Thank you very much, John. It was a very fascinating response from representing archivists and from a very mathematical and computer science perspective as well. Before I comment any further, before we let Irene respond, would you be happy for Perry to speak now? Wonderful. Thank you.
Right. So the first thing is, this is my year of experimenting with less slides. So I will be proceeding with the more tried and tested method of voice and gesticulation. So first of all, thank you very much, Nora, for inviting me, and thank you, Irene. That was fascinating. I was thinking of 100 different things as you went on, adding things to what I thought of, and I'm sure that some of the things I might bring up you're quite familiar with. So you had a limited amount of time, so in a sense it's meant to be a constructive comments to what you had to say. So first of all, I think this idea of taking control is very interesting. Of course, HAT is one variation of a number of projects that are working in this area, My Data, others. And I think those are extremely important because the first thing I'd like to talk about then is their importance to us in terms of autonomy and agency. So, but I did think one of the things that came to mind is when you were talking about the HAT and how it works and acquiring this, I remember something I read somewhere in the past year or so about fitness apps. And when fitness apps first came, they gave you all these ways to measure yourself. And it was seen that this was an empowering thing to be able to measure heart rate and how many steps and all these other things. But then it turned out the nature of the apps began to change because people actually didn't want to be so responsible for all that information. What they actually found, and the commercial providers found it worked and it was much more profitable, is to tell people what to do. They didn't want to manage the information themselves. They just want to be told they had to walk more or not eat that, or those sort of things. So I throw that sort of out as one thing, is that one of the things in this, what I would see broadly as a continuing rivalry between two different ways of approaching the problem of privacy and data protection and data security is one is about autonomy and agency, and the other one is about paternalism and governance. And you're working on one of those avenues, but it turns out sometimes people have a rhetorical desire for autonomy and agency, which is not borne out in practice. So that's one thing I'd start with. So, but then of course, that is certainly no argument for getting rid of autonomy and agency, because it's one of the great ironies of the whole, especially in Europe, the whole data protection, data privacy project, if I can call it that, is that it's founded on really very strong liberal democratic foundations. And at the heart of that, of course, is as individuals, we have to have our autonomy. We must have autonomy and agency. That's what it's all about. If you give up that, it's something quite different. So, although this turns out to be quite fragile and difficult to make it work in many circumstances, we are bound to that. We cannot discard it. So that despite the very large differences between approaches taken in the European Union and the United States on issues of data protection, they still share very strong commitments to ideas about personal autonomy and agency and controlling data. China, I'll just mention just very, very briefly, but it ought to bulk even larger than it does in the way people think about this, because China, of course, is developing a different and divergent model of data protection and security, in which there are necessarily elements of autonomy and agency, but they are not as strong. And you might think, well, that's not so important because that would be in China. And the question is just how do Chinese companies, for example, deal with data from elsewhere? But actually, through initiatives like One Belt, One Road, which are not just about infrastructure, they're about advancing a different way of cooperation between countries, different regulatory models. So China is beginning to move into the sphere, and we ought to start noticing it more in what it's doing and not thinking that they're just not properly replicating the European model. So one of the things I just wanted to comment on, and I think it's something you're fully aware of and quite an interesting response to, but of course this idea of where do companies go, move your app somewhere else, out of the reach of, say, the GDPR. And of course the GDPR retort to that is they've extended jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So if you are offering services, goods or services to individuals who are within the European Union, or you're monitoring the behavior of people within the European Union, then the GDPR tells us that those activities will be subject to the jurisdiction. But I think you know that well, so you'll have something to come back about escaping. Though it did occur to me when you were talking about this that you touched on something which I recall from many years ago, that idea that the internet has elephants and mice. And it's only the elephants that need to worry about regulation. And the myriad millions of mice can move, and they're just too small, too difficult to track. And so there's the Googles and the Facebooks, which find they're the elephants and having to contend with the GDPR and others.
You got your answer there.
Yes, so that might be the direction you're going with that. So there's also, and bearing in mind time, so one of the points that rose with both of your talks was this idea of personal data, and that's something I thought, I was thinking about before your talk, and then it's also come up very strongly. And it's because one of the phrases you used was, we give it all away. And the it seemed to me quite important of personal data, the it, what is it? Because it turns out that the concept of personal data is expanding. And it's only expanding so in one way, that because personal data is all information that relates to an identified or identifiable natural person, and that refers to turns out to be very powerful. So that's expanding it. So there's that it. So we get more and more data which we describe as personal data. But the flip side of that is that so much of it is it us who have given it away, or is it simply derived from that data which you could definitely say you have given? So it's derived, and then there's the further inferences from that. So I wonder, even in this model, just as you briefly presented it, it sort of had a sense of that personal data was something that could be seized, defined clearly, and there's a lot of argument that's not the direction we're traveling. That personal data is just it's a concept, a very useful concept, but it's just part of a kind of ecology of information. And it's not so hard. It may, in some circumstances, it will be, but in others, it's more of a fluid concept that works with other things. So I wonder, what you might have to say about that. I was just looking today at Nadezhda Portova's recent article about this, about the way in which the idea of what is personal data is just expanding. It seemed quite interesting. So just folding into that, one of the ways that we've dealt with this, and it ties in with what you're saying, is because, well, to reverse the order of things, it seems to me what I've taken from this is a very property-oriented view of data. And that seems to me at odds with a European view, which is based more in personality rights. It's more about our dignity and autonomy, and that is how we try and navigate through when it's important to have control, autonomy, and when not. But your view is more about it as a property right, and it seemed to me there was a clash there, and sometimes we might be asserting through HAT rights which would be overridden, because we would say, well, you may have this practical control, but actually in the circumstances your dignity value in it is very low, and there are other interests that will prevail. So I think that also would be something to go on. I noticed also that there was a great deal of attention to commercial use, you'd say commercial surveillance, and then with that commercial modulation of our lives that flows from that. But you didn't have much to say about the state, which is, the state was going to be inside the hat. Can't allow all these hats to exist without having some access. So there is that. And finally, just to wrap things up, is it also struck me that what you were talking about was oriented towards the sphere of data protection, the GDPR. But what's interesting in terms of ideas like personal data is expanding as a concept is that this sphere that seemed discrete in itself, which was data protection, is beginning to merge into the wider sphere of information governance. So, for example, we are now thinking of using data protection as access to information about algorithms and how an algorithm functions, so the right to explain an algorithm. But that seems in itself a more like public purpose. And you might see that, for example, freedom of information rights might be driven in the same way. So I think that's another aspect of this area is that I would say think of data protection as only being actually one aspect, what you're talking about, and that there's this wider sphere of information governance where some of the categories are beginning to have closer and closer interfaces. Right. I think that's enough. Thanks.
Well, very much. So thanks so much to both discussants for, I think, raising some really interesting questions and points for Irene. I suppose, lawyer to lawyer pair, I very much appreciated some of the points you raised about government surveillance, having to take into account the fact that, well, if we all have hats, then the government are going to legitimately ask what the provision is for getting access to the information in these hats, and what was happening with our smart hair dryers and other devices in a house when any particular type of criminality might have taken place, for example. But also the issue too of the fact that it's very interesting to approach personal data from the perspective of property law alone, but that we're now moving into this sphere where so many other different legal regimes are beginning to overlap and converge, speaking of convergent, in terms of how we treat that data, how we protect it, competition law, consumer fairness legislation, data protection, human rights law, which brings up a lot of the issues you raised about the different competing values that you'll have to take into account with a system like this. So before I say anything else, Irene, would you like to respond to a few of the points and we'll open it up?
So I've got a couple of pop-outs, right? So this is a digital the Digital Person Symposium that's on the 31st of May. That the HAT Foundation, together with Wilson College, Cambridge. Wilson is my college, so there are 3 professors chairing it. Personal Data, Digital Personhood, Freedom and Democracy is Professor John Norton, who is the Observer journalist as well. Personal Data, Data Analytics, Data Science and Technology, which is John Crowcroft at Cambridge. And for me, Value Economics and Markets. So whatever you hear from me tends to sit very much here. I absolutely understand that there are many facets. In fact, the reason why we're creating, and this is the second year of the Digital Person, you were there speaking last year, and this year is going to be one full day with all segments to talk about what digital person really means in the 21st century. Around the rights, around, you talk about the archives, around digital personhood, my memories. When I get old and I can't remember my kitten's name, the password is what happens to my digital assets, and what in 50 years time somebody finds my hat, what is that archivally means? And I think we are also starting to explore issues around what digital humanities really mean, digital person, and the interact and how we think about it. I understand when it comes to the nature of the person, you mentioned autonomy. There is something about the hat that is quite fundamental to some of our beliefs, and which is identity is not it. Identity is a freely evolving construct on the hat. It is much more that we talk about personas. So if I only share the data I wish to share with you, I can exhibit a million personas through my hat and not my real identity. And the freedom to be able to do that is very important for someone like me, a lot less important and much more crucial to the state. So in a way, I am quite radical in a sense. I run from the state all the time. Some people, when I talk to my colleagues in Singapore, which have huge trust in the state, and here, when they have so much trust in the state, I was born in a country of which you have very little faith in the state. And so I place a lot of trust in personal freedom. And so that's the liberal cause that I tend to go for. And therefore the ability to exhibit whatever I want to be on the internet, including being a dog, is something I hold very dear. Clearly that sets itself against what the needs of the state are in terms of managing the citizens and people. But it's really debatable from my point of view whether Susie, who works in the bank 9 to 5, is the same as that dominatrix persona out in Second Life, or playing Candy Crush on an app. What kind of person is she? How much of that is a mirror of what she is in real life? What is real anyway? All these kind of come into play. And I believe those are the kind of conversations we need to get into.
in terms of digital personhood, the role of the state, the role of data, the role of, so that's one of the things that I wanted to sort of explain. I think you also mentioned the more fluid, expanding definition. So I sort of spoke a lot about the hat and personal data much more from an economics perspective here, because it's one lecture, I had to choose one of the three. So, and being an economist, I chose the economic side. I also tend to choose and pick the battles I wish to fight in. And currently, my biggest battle is just simply control. That and in a way, that until that market, which is really a tide against us right now, is kind of understood and pushed back a little. We can talk a lot about what we want the world to be, but then if the current internet prevails, then you can keep talking if nothing's going to change. So a lot of the design of the hat is to push back that tide. So there's a lot, there's a very strong interventionistic change, epistemic object in the hat to try to drive through that kind of change, and that's part of the agenda. Doesn't mean that the other things that we talk about are not important. They are, and currently, but that's the reason why you see that's a very strong activist tone in that. In fact, tomorrow I send a letter to Spotify for subject access requests into my hat. So, and there's a whole group of us that are, now that we have our microserver, and you can join me on my Telegram group, issuing these letters soon, because API access to subject access has never been done, and so you sort of push those boundaries a bit. And I think the question of property versus autonomy it's a good one. You must have seen there was an article that said Amazon is now giving you discounts on some of the products they sell to you while you're watching a video. The more you watch a video, the higher the discount you get. And it is the notion that the more they can influence or collect data about you, the greater value they are assuming, and therefore productizing to give you some monetary benefit. The notion of property is an interesting one, because if you have a control over a platform like Google and Facebook, the need to make discrete what you own is not that important. You have everything. Who cares? I don't need to make discrete what personal data is. You already have everything. However, in trying to organize a market where transactions can happen and you do not have control of anything right now, there is a need to put some boundaries to what is it you can acquire. And it's a very Cohesion theorem to say, if you don't have boundaries and you have great ambiguity, transactions go up and the market fails. And so there is a certain need to put boundaries, just so that it doesn't, what Cohesion economics traditionally say, it doesn't matter who owns it, just as long as it's clear, then a bargaining solution can be reached. If it's not clear, transaction costs go up, we can never reach a bargaining solution, we'll argue about whether it's yours or mine, right? And this is why you see that come across very strongly from the design point of view. It may, of course, and I acknowledge that absolutely, that these boundaries are not real. They are not really the property. But yet, when you try to organize transactions to which data has to move to create control, then you may need to create these boundaries. Until such a way that it comes, say, to be mine, then the boundaries no longer have to exist. And that's the reason the schema of the hat allows you to deconstruct all of that and just be whatever you want it to be, as big lump as possible. So that's why you see boundary, and that's why you see property rights in a way being emphasized here, more as a pragmatic solution to what we're trying to achieve. It may not be right, but it's what we're trying to achieve. And I think I took a few of it. I don't think of it. Right. Thanks.
Thank you, Irene.